Hello and welcome to Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. In Minding the Forest, we talk about sustainable forestry, how important forests are, especially to Louisiana, issues in the forest products industry, and how forests are beneficial to everyone. I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. We have with us today Wade Dubé, who is the state forester for Louisiana, and he is also assistant commissioner for the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and visit with you all today.
Tell us a little bit about the industry and its health from the state's aspect.
The forest industry as a whole, or our involvement with the industry, comes down to basically a couple of things, and that is our interaction, our involvement with the landowners in developing management plans so that they can have a venue to manage their property, their forest lands, and we do that for a number of reasons, with the health and vigor of the forest being one of them. We accomplish this by, with the management plan, setting up items or incidences such as control burns. We work with the landowners to give them advice with particular silvicultural activities. And we do all of this. We typically serve the smaller tract landowners. Mm-hmm. The larger landowners we refer to our consulting foresters throughout the state. And we work with the landowners who want to manage their property and do so scientifically and efficiently, but need the assistance and maybe don't have the acreage that would appeal to a consultant or a consulting firm. And so, that's where it becomes very important, because the majority of the landowners in Louisiana are private landowners. We have some corporate lands, we have some federal and state lands, but the majority of the forest lands in Louisiana are privately owned. So when we talk about health and vigor, it's very important for us and the role that we play with the numerous private landowners to do such things as fire detection and suppression, forest health issues such as the southern pine beetle trapping or the bug flights that we do periodically through the year, so that we can advise the landowners and share this information with forest industry, forest consultants, so that they can in turn apply this to their lands and to their clients.
That's one thing that we hadn't talked about last time was the flyovers, and certainly the traps that y'all set every year to see what the southern pine beetle or emerald ash borer, which is a new thing for Louisiana in the last few years. In doing that, it would seem like a lot of this land is sort of a jigsaw puzzle. You have some smaller landowners, maybe 10, 20 acres, 40 maybe, and in the midst of all that it's intertwined with some of the larger land and whatnot, but not a whole lot of folks at that level. Do they really look for those things? Do they look for the health of their forests often?
We have a number of landowners that are very tuned in to changes that take place out there. A lot of times what we find is that the incidences are in remote areas and they just may not be seen. And the interesting thing about this is the insects and the diseases don't differentiate between corporate land, federal land, private land. So that's why we're up doing what we do and trying to get out and be an early detection, if you will, to notify people, hey, we've got this situation. You need to send someone to take a look at it, or it's someone that we work with, and we'll send our foresters out to ground check the activity. We've had a situation, and I don't know if it's unique to the South or to our state and the surrounding states, but we've had a lot of calls that have come in, a number of calls that have come in, and the concern is I have southern pine beetles on my forest land, and basically when we check on it, it's Ips engraver beetles. They're just a little bit out of character as far as attacking a single stem or one or two trees, they'll go in, and we typically see a larger area that's being affected, but it's not near the damage and devastation that is caused by the southern pine beetles that we've seen in the past. So it's important to look at it at the big picture and share information. If it's something that shows up on a private landowner's property, we want to share that with all the neighbors. We want to share that with an area or region. And likewise, if it's something that occurs on state or federal lands, that information is being shared as well.
How do you reach out to the landowners in the vicinity of an area that might be infected with beetles?
The best way is through the forestry associations and the landowner base that we have. Certainly we've got the Louisiana Forestry Association, but all across the state we have parishes that either have a parish association or they'll combine with other parishes so that we have a regional association, and working with the leadership and the membership of those organizations is our best way to get the word out as quickly as possible.
When these areas, and you said they were mostly remote areas where they pop up, we've had some storms over the last several years, of course, Laura, last year, Ida. Have there been spots where beetles have been a problem or any other disease that may have popped up?
What we did, the direct response of these storms, is to add additional measures, an additional trapping cycle, additional flights to go up and look for any type of faders or occurrence of insect or parasite issues. And certainly it is of concern because we had all the down timber, but the trees that did remain and survive the storm were more than likely stressed to the extent of the pheromone production is making these residual trees prime for any type of attack to insect or disease. So it's critical that we go into these areas. One of the things that we did see right after these storms was the availability of grant funding that came through Congress, USDA, U.S. Forest Service to the states that had areas that were affected. And that funding allowed us to go in with the additional dollars to pay for the additional trapping, the additional bug flights, and so forth. And so we were fortunate from that aspect.
Any areas that were found to have particular stresses or problems?
Nothing that was out of the ordinary. We continue to monitor them, obviously. We had several parishes that had southern pine beetle show up in our traps, but it was not outside of the range of acceptable as far as the number of beetles, and what we look for is not just the number of pine beetles, but the number of clarid beetles as well that will, or the good beetles, if you will. So we're looking for that break, and so that's what we found. We did see an increase in pine beetles, but we also saw an increase in these biological measures as well.
Again, these are remote areas. When you reach out to the landowners, of course, the smaller associations, the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're always in touch with you all and certainly our members. We have many who are out-of-state owners, and I'm sure that adds a different challenge to notification and monitoring of those properties. Is that accurate?
That is correct. We do have a number of absentee landowners in the state, the majority of which have consultants that are managing their assets for them. So we try to work with them. One of the ways that we're able to compile the databases through some of the services that we provide or some of the cost share measures that are in place and these landowners have applied. So we've got a database of who owns what. We also, from a fire perspective, we constantly ask for this information to be sent in, and we update it as we can on the ownership, because what we try to do is reach out. If we go out and respond to a wildfire just like we would with insect or disease outbreaks, we try to notify the landowner hey, this occurred on your property. We just want to make you aware. You had a fire, or we found some insect activity you may want to check out. So we try to maintain. Of course, it's not 100% database. We still have situations where even in-state owners, we do not have that information for that landowner. This information is private information and proprietary in nature in some cases. So it's not an all-exclusive list of landowners to do this. Typically, if it's in an area, we reach out to a landowner, and just by word of mouth with the surrounding landowners or the neighbors, we can get it out. It's just a little slower in seeing that process play out.
I would imagine the generational changes as the land goes from one generation to the next, that offers a challenge as well, doesn't it?
I see that as one of the primary issues that we're facing in forestry today. We're seeing it all across the South. Anywhere that you have the majority of the land's privately owned, we're seeing it come up. But you're absolutely right. Every time succession takes place on a tract of land, you get heirs that will inherit a smaller piece. The land is subdivided again and again and again. And so what's happening is some of that land is sold off. Some of it is kept in by that individual. Some of them actually form an LLC and leave the land as a larger tract of land. So we've got all kind of different opportunities that take place for landowners, but it provides a challenge because to effectively manage that property, at some point in time, you're going to have to consider some type of harvesting operation. And the smaller the tract of land, the more difficult it is to try to find a contractor that can and will take on those acres that are being diminished.
That's another aspect of what the Department of Ag and Forestry does as far as working with the professional loggers who go out and perform these harvests. Recently, we've had an update in the Best Management Practices Manual. So we have a new BMP manual. You all do an excellent job of monitoring how these BMPs are being used and to make sure that the practices are consistent with that. How do you go about doing that?
Our role in this is the compliance checks, the measures that we do, and it's on a 3-year cycle. And the way it works in a number of different measures, we collect information, whether it's something that we have harvest data or silvicultural data. And I think it's important to stress that it's any silvicultural activity can be part of the audit that takes place, not strictly harvest. Harvests are typically the easier to locate, especially when we do our survey from the air. But the way we go about, we compile the information through harvest data that's submitted to us, the management part of that, the plans and so forth that come in. And then we also fly a grid prior to. We have a formula that is used to determine how many random plots are visited for an on-the-ground assessment. So of all the activity, all silvicultural activity that we can put into the database, we randomly select the number specified by the formula, and it's broken out. We do some in different regions of the state. It's not going to all fall in one part of the state. So we get in a good cross-section. And then our foresters will go out, visit these sites, and there's an assessment that is done. We work with our foresters to make sure that we're getting the same look, even though we have different individuals, because some of it is subjective in nature. We want to make sure they're looking at it with equal eyes. So we don't grade a site harder in one area than another. It's going to give us a better cross-section. And then that information is compiled and goes back, and the reporting comes from that. When the revision to the BMP manual was in progress, that was one of the things that I requested of the group, was to make sure, here is the tool, the instrument that we use when we go out on the ground and do the assessment. Let's make sure we're telling the people that use this BMP manual the information that we're actually going to be looking for, so that they're not practicing one thing and we're grading them on something slightly different. And I think we accomplished that.
Just to be clear, though, the BOP manual is sort of a voluntary regulation. This is not a government regulation that comes in and says, thou shalt. These are the best things that you can do to make sure that your property during harvest time is being taken care of in a sustainable way. Is that correct?
That is correct. Louisiana has voluntary best management practices, and we want to make sure that we maintain that status. And one way to do it is to govern ourselves. And so this BMP manual, the programs where we have compliance checks, whether it be the annual or the every 3-year compliance check that we do, or if there is some type of practice that is reported as being outside of the guidelines, and we go out through the association or through our department to look into what took place, if any type of restoration work needs to be done to correct the action that took place, to make sure we're following the best guidelines for the right reasons.
From the landowner standpoint, another thing the LDAF does has to do with severance taxes. Each year, the commission meets, LDAF is involved, and the new severance tax figures are decided on. Take us through that process. What happens to reach those particular figures?
Sure. The severance tax rates for the next year, the rates are determined in the fourth quarter meeting, the December meeting of the Louisiana Forestry Commission. Those rates are set by the Louisiana Forestry Commission, and we do work with oversight from the Tax Association and the Department of Revenue, so that we've got input. They're looking at what we have put forward to make sure that everything was in compliance with statute and rule. But yeah, the way it works is we compile data every month that comes in to us from the Department of Revenue. Our statutory obligation in this is to report this information. We do that in a quarterly market report that's available online, and certainly we can supply a hard copy if someone requests. But that information comes in, and we compile it monthly. It's broken out quarterly, and then each quarter this report is produced online. We take the last 2 quarters and the first 2 quarters. That information is compiled of 2 separate years, and that information is put into formula. It's the formula that is set up statutorily, and it gives us a report or a projected or proposed tax rate for the next year. And basically that is in 5 different categories: pine saw timber, hardwood saw timber, pine chip and saw, pine pulpwood, and hardwood pulpwood. And so each of those 5 categories we get, it's an average, if you will, the value per ton, and it's converted over by the rate. The 2 hardwood categories and the pine chip and saw category is calculated at 2.25%, and the pulpwood categories are at 5%. Out of that, we get the tax per ton. It's converted over, everything's converted into tons. And so that information is then presented to the Forestry Commission. They consider it. The law statute allows the Forestry Commission to consult with third-party information. In other words, if someone subscribes to a reporting subscription that will give them information on average or current prices for each of these categories, that information can be used to make adjustments to these rates. Typically what we see is the chip and saw rate is the one that fluctuates, and that is the one that has to be adjusted in the meeting. And the reason for that is quite simply sometimes chip and saw gets reported as saw timber and sometimes it gets reported as pulpwood. So it just depends on where it falls out. So the commission members will use this third-party information to say, the formula is giving us a number that is really a little high for chip and saw or a little low, and they can make adjustments. It's voted on by the commission. Once the votes are cast and the rates are decided on, those rates will go into policy for the upcoming year.
I think some folks who get confused, they see these, because we post these on our website as well, and they say, well, that's what I should be getting from a timber. Those are not figures that they would get for the timber. Those have to do with the taxing of the severance taxes.
That is correct. Louisiana timber severance tax is calculated by category. The law indicates that the severance tax on timber is owed by the owner of the timber at the time of severance. So if you're a landowner, you're going to negotiate the sale of your timber, and you're going to get the best price for your timber. These rates have nothing to do with that. They're not going to come into play just yet. Okay, you sell your timber. If you do pay as cut, you still own the timber. As cut, as hauled, you're paid, then you're obligated to pay the severance tax. If you sell it lump sum, someone buys it, that individual now owns this timber. When it's severed, they're obligated to pay the tax. In most cases, the mill will pay the severance tax on behalf of the owner. In other words, they'll hold out the severance tax from what they're going to give them for the wood, and that is submitted to the Department of Revenue. That way the landowner doesn't have to worry about writing a check. When they receive the money that they're going to get for their timber, the severance tax has already been deducted from that.
That seems to be a more practical way to handle that. Wasn't that handled in legislation to make that official, even though that was the practice for so many years?
There were some issues that came up with how it was being paid. Some mills pay it on behalf of the landowner, some don't. The mills are not obligated to do that. It's basically a courtesy, if you will, for the landowner with the bookkeeping. And so we had to go back in and we had to clarify who's obligated to do what. And so I think we've got it to a point where the practice will continue. And I do believe it's in everybody's best interest, simply because, the mills already have all of that information. They know what is being paid for the timber. They know what the severance tax rate is and the weight and whatnot. So it's a lot easier to cut a check to the landowner and cut a check to revenue for the sale of the timber.
In a way, it's kind of like the way sales taxes are handled, where the merchant handles at the sale of the process, even though the buyer pays the tax.
Correct. It's very similar to that.
Yeah, and mills, what's important to them is the chain of custody of where they get the fiber from, because they are going to be audited, and their sustainability score certainly is important to keep track of, just for the people who buy the products that they manufacture to know that it comes from a sustainably managed property.
That's another important issue or factor here. We're seeing more and more requirements for certification, and in whichever method of certification that you follow, the chain of custody is at the forefront. And so it goes back to, is there a management plan for that property? Is this timber harvest going to be replanted? If it is a final harvest, if not, if it's a thinning, what does the plan say for your next phase or treatments and so forth? And so it's very important to establish a chain of custody. If you're going to take advantage of other markets, we're seeing it now with the biofuels markets that are coming up. Met with a representative of one of these companies virtually not too long ago, and that was one of the things that they have to ensure is that it is the timber that they're using comes from certified forest. And we discussed at length, what forms of certification, what is required, and it goes back to this. So having these records in place through something as simple as the scale tickets and the severance tax records and whatnot, that all sends you in a direction of we're establishing that chain of custody.
Back to severance taxes, those go to really to further sustainability in the state. Certainly the state has a portion that they use for revenue, and that's certainly understandable. But LDAF has been able to establish a program by which these taxes that the landowners inevitably are paying come back to them. How does that work?
The way the system is set up for timber severance tax, and I think it's important to point out that timber is the only ag commodity that pays a severance tax. And it was a measure that was set up way before your time and my time. And the intent was for the severance tax at the time was to go back into the infrastructure that allowed for the harvest of the timber. So when we talk about the timber severance tax and how that money is divided, it's an interesting process. On average, we see about $12.5 million a year collected in Louisiana for timber severance tax. 3/4 of that money collected, of any timber severance tax collected, remains or goes back to the parish where the timber is severed. So if timber is cut in Rapides Parish, then 3/4 of any severance tax paid for timber harvested there returns to the governmental seat for Rapides Parish, whether it be a police jury system or the parish council or whatever that governing body may be. And the initial use of those funds was for road maintenance and construction. That was something that the forestry industry wanted to set up to make sure that, we understand we're going to use these roads. We want to make sure that there's a system in place for us to maintain those roads. And so for that reason, the majority of timber severance stays in the parish where the timber is harvested.
The intent being the roads would be kept up so that they can return to harvest at another time after everything is replanted.
Correct. To do our part to make sure the roads are maintained. Over time, the use of those funds, I think in most parishes, Rapides I know has an ordinance that specifies that timber severance dollars go to roads. The other parishes, I'm not aware of ordinances that are that specific. So I think the money goes into the operating budget for those parishes, and of course they all have a road maintenance or construction budget. So to say the money's being spent there or somewhere else, a equal amount of money or more in all cases, I'm sure, is being spent on that the infrastructure. So that accounts for the first 3/4.
What happens to the other
The
quarter?
remaining quarter comes to the state. Of that remaining 25%, it's divided. 3/4 of that money goes into our Forest Productivity Program, which is a cost incentive program for reforestation. Then the remaining 25% very recently, up until 2 years ago, went into the state general fund, and we had Representative McFarland was successful in implementing an amendment to that process that allowed that remaining 25% to come to the Office of Forestry for salaries. And so it was added to our salary budget, and as a result, we were able to bring 10 additional firefighter positions to our payroll. So the portion that goes to FPP at that point in time is the process that we use that was established to help landowners with offsetting the cost of replanting, to encourage replanting of property once the timber is harvested.
And the replanting, it's not just putting trees in the ground, it's also prep work and things of that nature. What are some of the things that a landowner can do through the FPP?
There are a number of practices that are allowed through the Forest Productivity Program, starting with a number of site preparation practices. Burning, for example, a chemical application prior to burning. Sometimes there has to be bedding or other ground prep work that has to be done in order to grow or plant and grow a successful stand of timber. Prescribed burning, in addition to site prep burning, is another. The good thing that we were able to accomplish several years ago was any FPP stand, once it's approved an FPP stand, you can use this program to conduct periodic prescribed burning for the health and vigor of that stand. It has to be justified, but it can be carried out. So any effort, basically, with restrictions obviously, but any effort to reestablish or to establish a stand of timber. In some cases, through afforestation, we have pastures converted to forest lands and so forth. The program will also work to that end as well.
Many of the forest landowners who have really kept a management plan for their property, oftentimes they already have a forester that's helping them to manage that property. For those who have not been involved with FPP or even looking to have a management plan, but they don't, it's one of those things, I guess, kind of like a will. You know you need one, but you just don't get around to it. So for those property owners, what do they do?
I would urge everyone who has forest lands and are managing forest lands to work with the forester, whether it be a consulting forester for larger tracts or if you have a small tract of land, contact our offices. We've got districts all across the state. We've got foresters assigned to each parish in the state. We'll come out and work with the landowner to develop a management plan, and it's a fluid document. If you set this plan, we had the hurricanes that we talked about. We had a lot of plans that had to be rewritten after those storms came through. Mm-hmm. It changed the face of what these landowners were dealing with. So we can work with the smaller landowners. In most cases, it's a service that we provide. There is no charge for that service to the landowner, and so there's no reason that to not call us. Again, if you've got a larger tract of land, larger acreages that you're dealing with, we're going to refer you to a number of consultants in your area so that we're not competing with the private consultants. We don't want to get in that situation. We just want to provide the opportunity for everyone who wants to manage their property to do so. So we can help with that. We can put you in touch with someone that can help with the plan. And, that was a very good question, because a management plan is a requirement to be enrolled in the Forest Productivity Program. You can reach out to our foresters to help get an application, get established in the program. The consulting foresters, we work very well with them to get applications completed and filed to be considered for reimbursement through the FPP.
That's another point. I don't know if we had stated it clearly, but it is a reimbursement program. So you have to get the plan approved. You're going to pay to have that work done, and then you will be reimbursed. How much? How does that formula work?
The program shifted from what we consider a true cost share program to an incentive program about 3 years ago. And so the way it works is based on current prices, and we're talking average, because I understand what the price for getting work done in South Louisiana compared to getting the same work done in North Louisiana, there may be differences. So we're talking about statewide averages of what these practices cost. We set our incentive up to basically cover 75% of the cost for those practices. So the landowner is basically going to come out of pocket 25%. The program will put up the other 75%. It is reimbursable. So if for example, a landowner is going to just do a site prep, burn, and plant. The practices would be the burning, the cost of the seedlings, and the labor. And so the landowner would pay, if they're working with their consultant, they'll work through the consultant or through our foresters to get this done. And the site prep burn would be whatever the invoice for that submitted, the cost of the seedlings, the cost of the labor. Submit those invoices, and based on what was approved in the application, then we would calculate how much of what was paid could be reimbursed to that landowner. And again, by going to an incentive base, you're approved for this practice, so you can spend up to this amount, and you'll get 100% reimbursement for that.
Is there a cap?
Yes, the cap is $10,000. The cap is set by the Forestry Commission. It is currently $10,000. It can go up, and what the discussion that we had when it was set at $10,000 was the commission members felt like this would provide an opportunity for more landowners to be able to participate in the program than if we set the cap at $15,000. In other words, more money would go to fewer landowners if we had a higher cap. So that's the reason that it was set at $10,000. We've had some other considerations that we've put into play. For example, in years past, we have always been able to fund every application that came through because we had a surplus of money at the treasurer's office in the FPP account. And so what we would do if we had $3 million and we had $3.5 million worth of requests, we go to the legislature and say, can we have another $500,000 in authority and move the other $500,000 into the program and fund everyone? Well, what was happening when we got in budget crisis situations, a lot of these accounts were looked at, and the legislature has the statutory authority to sweep these stat debt accounts, and so they can take a percentage of the dollars that were there. So it made us stop and say, hey, it's in the landowner's best interest not to leave a huge balance sitting in these accounts. So we moved money down. We expended the surplus that was left at the treasurer's office to where now we are getting very close, and I think within this year or the next we'll have it down to a good science of dollars in, dollars out. The problem with that is it's first come, first serve, because not everyone will. It's based on funding. So when we get to that magic number, this is the dollar amount we have for this year, we stop. So when the applications come in, we time and date stamp them in. We want to make sure if your application got here 5 minutes before mine and we run out of money, then yours gets funded and mine is the one chronologically that is going to have to wait until next year. So, and this past year, I think was the first year we actually had to return applications to landowners and inform them that we had reached our limit for the dollar amount available.
So you have to get your application in as soon as possible. What does that mean? When do you start taking them in, and when's the deadline?
The application period is April and May. We receive applications until funds are expended, starting the 1st of April, and we'll go through the end of May if we do not deplete the funds. And again, it's first come, first serve. I think we ran out of funding with 2 weeks to go in that cycle last time. The other side of the coin is we will receive and review applications year-round. We call it pre-certification. You send it in, we go over it, we tell you if something's missing, we tell you you need this, you need that, before we can accept it, or we'll send it back saying everything's fine. April 1st, get it to us. Bring it here, mail it to us, however you want to get it to us. The biggest problem that we run into for an application having to go back to the landowner is a missed signature, or there are a number of errors and there's no power of attorney, so everyone has to sign it. And it didn't get signed by all of the participants. The problem with that, now that it's first come, first serve, is if we send it back to you, you get it signed, and you send it back the next day, you get back in line. So, we don't want anyone to get their application in early enough and miss a signature and not receive funding because it had to go back for that signature.
So if we turn in our plans, yours gets accepted, yours the last one, mine not. Does my application hold for next year? Do I have to resubmit it? How does that work?
We will send them back to you, and you have to resubmit. If we didn't do that, I'd have a backlog of applications, so we'd get to a point where next year I'd just fill the backlog and none of the new applications would be considered. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, worked with the Forestry Commission. The decision was made, we're going to return them, and we're going to receive them first come, first serve next year when the applications begin to come in.
Does it have to be received by mail?
Nope. You can walk it in.
Okay.
You can bring it in. We're actually working on trying to get an electronic form of the application so that you can actually submit it by email. The issue that we've run into, and I'd like to make sure I get this out there, because I've had this question by a number of landowners, why can't we email it? Why can't there be an online form? What we've got to overcome, each application has a specific application number. And so if we get a form online, we had to account for a unique application number, because that application number is how we track that for the life of the project. And so we're working to when we get them printed, they're numerically ordered, and I can give you a stack. As long as you got an application number, it can come in. That's why we had an issue in the past. We had samples that were posted, and very prudent way of doing it is just let me download this and I'll use this template to fill it out. It didn't have an application number on it, so it posed a problem. So we're working to create a system that would generate a application number. If you download it and you don't use it, then I didn't want a blank space out there when we're trying to sequentially get these. So we're trying to come up with we're working with our IT folks to develop a system that would basically download a number. If it's not used, it would be discarded, and we would just go to the next number in numerical sequence.
Okay, Wade, what have we not talked about that we should, as far as severance taxes and FPP?
We got thrown a curve at the end of last season. We now, before we can make a payment, we have to go through the IRS to make sure that the individual that is receiving the payment will receive the payment. So it was interesting, because it's like, okay, that's one more step. So we actually have to log into a system and verify that recipient's tax ID information, whether it be a social or a tax ID number if it's a corporation of some sort. So, we don't just meet in my office every Thursday to decide, how can we add additional steps to this process. Trust me, we have them thrust upon us in a lot of cases.
It sounds as though they're marking that as revenue for either a corporation or a LLC or an individual. Is that?
And it is. We actually have to send out a W-2. We have to receive a W-9 as part of the application process, and we submit a W-2 for the payment, the reimbursement payment that was made, that would be needed to file with that individual or that company's taxes.
So landowners also have to be aware that any funds they get from the FPP will be taxed by the federal government.
Correct. It's going to fall into one of the tax categories. That's an area to discuss with your CPA to determine how it would apply to you. But I think it's safe to say that participating in the program is still a better option than I'm going to have to pay taxes on or whatever. I think the landowners will see that they'll come out as a benefit.
There's still a huge benefit for
Absolutely.
them, because it's cost effective for them to sustain their forests and to keep replanting and regrowing a renewable resource.
Absolutely. And, what we're seeing a lot of when we look at the severance tax paid, a lot of times this tax is paid and we have it coming from sources that otherwise would not be able to participate in the program. They're a company, a corporation, or something that precludes them from applying. So they're actually putting money into a program that's going to help the private landowner or the smaller landowner benefit and to reestablish, because it's like everything else. The cost to carry out these practices doesn't seem to go down. It just seems to go up every year. So chemical prices and everything else. So we're looking to make adjustments to the program that will allow us to be conscious, aware of that, and to make modifications accordingly.
Wade Dubé, State Forester for the state of Louisiana, and also Assistant Commissioner for the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Thanks so much, Wade. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Mind of the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the LFA and its programs that help support landowners, loggers, and forest product manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You also can find out how you could be part of the Louisiana Forestry Association. If you have a program idea, comments, send me an email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue @laforestry.com. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.